Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. My name is Chris Muntz, and this is episode 44, Prioritizing Technique, Not Style, with Andrew Crane and Jami Rhodes. This special episode is a tag team. I've never had two guests at once on Zoom just firing fantastic information at me all at the same time. I felt like I was playing doubles versus single tennis, but it was so much fun, and I got a ton of intellectual exercise in the process. Dr. Andrew Crane is at Brigham Young University as the director of choirs there, and Dr. Jami Rhodes is at East Carolina University, and she's a voice professor, but also does double duty there as a choir director. And of course, Dr. Crane and Dr. Rhodes were once colleagues at East Carolina, which you'll hear more about later, and that's kind of the connection here. They know each other very well. So in this episode, they join me to discuss some common myths, misconceptions, and vocal pedagogy practices that we try to undertake in a choral rehearsal that sometimes cause us more work in the long run. We all know this problem. When I say something to a group of singers, could they all internalize it, even though it doesn't apply to them? I mean, we've got 60 voices in a choir, 60 different techniques going on. But according to Dr. Crane and Dr. Rhodes, there are things that a choral director can say that are sound, fundamental principles that if you stick to your guns and stay in the lane of those fundamental principles, your choir will be getting a voice lesson the whole time they're in choir. You need to fix the intonation? Great. Have you fixed the technique first? Or are you talking to the singers about their ears? Listen, can you not hear that it's in tune? Sing it in tune, use your ears. While saying those things is great, if the technique's wrong, you might be shooting the wrong target. Are you trying to achieve blend? Maybe a unified technical approach to healthy vocal production can do all of the heavy lifting for us. If all the singers have the idea of what it means to sing well and to sing with resonance and to sing with a healthy production, then maybe the concepts of blend stop having to be discussed in your rehearsal. This episode has so many good one-liners and quotes that I had trouble choosing them for the promo materials. So don't miss the entire episode. Tune in at your own pace. And listen as we go here, but you're not going to want to miss this information. The conversation was not only informative, but practical and flat out fun. So stick around all the way through this episode. And you might want to bring your notepad along as you're listening. Unless you're in your car, please do not write notes while you're listening in the car. So before we get to that, I've got some announcements and some things to cover and shout outs to give as always. I've got a harebrained idea, and I'm thinking about putting on an in-person convention in 2021, a small one. And here's the line of thinking that I'm going down. A lot of the big organizations have already canceled their 2021 conventions. And yes, there's an aspect of that involves keeping us safe and keeping you safe. And I understand that. But one thing I was realizing and keeping in mind, especially since I run a small arts organization, a lot of the reason that things are getting canceled this far in advance is safety related on one hand, but on the other hand, it's uncertainty related. Meaning if you're trying to put on a convention for 1,000 people, there's a lot of investment of money and time that has to go in ahead of time. And we don't know what 2 months from now is going to be like right now. So the harebrained idea is Choralosophy Con 2021. A tiny choral convention, a choral convention for about 50 or 60 people that just need to go in person somewhere and have some one-on-one, small group, collegial interaction with choral directors from around the country and have some face-to-face, some socially distanced, face-to-face professional development. So if you're interested in this idea, what you're going to want to do is go on Facebook and try to find the Choralosophy Con 2021 small Facebook group. It's about 25 or 26 of us right now. It's a harebrained idea that I just came up with, but go over there and find that if you're interested, if you're listening and you're interested in that. And we can try to create a convention, because I think if with only 50 or 60 people, we could find plenty of space in a convention hall in a hotel and put on some amazing conversations, professional development sessions, interaction, socialization, bouncing our problems off of each other, our ideas. So if you're interested in that, you can also send me an email at choralosophy@gmail.com. Right now, it's looking like spring of 2021 is going to be the date we shoot for, some of the time window that we shoot for. And of course, as always, the sponsors, the affiliates of this show, the way an affiliation on a podcast works is I don't get any kind of regular check from these companies that help us out. I think there's a misconception out there about how this works and how the podcast biz works. If you go and purchase something with the Choralosophy code, that helps me a lot. That's how they know we're listening, and that's how I get revenue to pay for the cost of the show, and hopefully someday turn this into a part-time job. Now, if you are somebody who uses my code frequently, then you are the real MVP, because that's where I get my help. So you can use that code. Of course, right now the big ticket is those Resonance Singers masks. Those are going like hotcakes, and because they're the best product of its kind on the market. They protect you and your singers better than any of the other masks, and they're amazingly comfortable. Right now, I've got mine going every week in rehearsal, and I'm snapping a microphone on the front of the mask, and I can speak and sing very easily. I can be understood, and I can wear it for hours. And they're really, really good masks. So you can head over to mymusicfolders.com. They have lots of other cool stuff over there beyond just the masks, but right now that's the one that everybody needs. And you can enter Choralosophy at checkout. Also, Sight Reading Factory. If you have not gotten your Sight Reading Factory membership for you and all of your students for the year, it's not too late. Go get those and start the literacy process. You're going to hear us talk later in this episode about how important it is for your rehearsals to move quickly, especially in this environment. Well, a rehearsal moves quickly when the singers can read. So implement a Sight Reading Factory regimen, which you can go back to listen to this show, episode 18, where I kind of lay out my whole process. And you can get rehearsals to happen no matter what age group you are, rehearsals to happen quickly where singers are accessing correct pitches, correct rhythms. It's all about consistency and having a tool like Sight Reading Factory. Okay, so I built this episode up a lot, and I don't mean to sell things over their target, but this is a really good episode. So without further ado, stick around, listen to Andrew Crane and Jami Rhodes talking about vocal ped in the choral classroom. Okay, everybody, I am here with Dr. Andrew Crane and Dr. Jami Rhodes, who are joining me today on this episode to help slay some cows. And I am really, really excited for this talk. We're going to be talking mostly about vocal production in the choral setting, vocal pedagogy, and kind of laying down some myths. So doctors, the doctors are in. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
No.
All right. Well, why don't you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves first? So Dr. Crane, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are?
Okay, so I'm Andy Crane. I'm the Director of Choral Activities at Brigham Young University. Before that, I was in the same job at East Carolina University, actually where I met Dr. Rhodes here. She was is a voice teacher on the faculty there when I was there. Before that was at Cal State University in San Bernardino. Before that, taught high school in Utah. Married with 4 kids and got my degrees, bachelor's and master's here at BYU. I'm an alum, and my doctorate's at Michigan State. I also do a lot of singing on the side.
Awesome. Welcome to the show. How about you, Dr. Rhodes?
I'm Jami Rhodes. I, as Dr. Crane said, work at East Carolina University. I'm associate professor there where I teach voice. I'm the mezzo on faculty, and I teach a lot of applied and conduct the ECU concert choir, which is the treble ensemble. And I also run the vocal pedagogy and voice science program there, which is one of the tracks for the master's program there. And I also teach the undergraduate classes in pedagogy as well. And before I was at ECU, I did a lot of singing, and somewhere in there I taught public high school here in North Carolina. I'm a native of North Carolina. I actually did my undergrad at ECU in music education approximately 7 billion years ago, and then did a master's degree in vocal performance at the University of South Carolina, and a doctorate in vocal performance and pedagogy at Louisiana State University.
Wonderful. Well, my introduction to both of you guys actually comes through James Mock, because he worked with me at high school at the high school I teach at for a couple of years. And Dr. Crane, the introduction to you was at one point a few months into teaching together that he said, "You sound a lot like Andy Crane when you talk to choirs." and then later, Dr. Rhodes, you came to Missouri to give a presentation on this very topic, and I loved it. And James also like made me go. He said, you're going to just love this. So it sounds like, just a spoiler for the audience that you're listening, I did not invite these two folks on because I was afraid I was going to disagree with what you guys were saying. I feel like a lot of the things we're already on the same page, but I do think these are things that we're going to talk about today that are valuable information for anyone who is trying to understand how the voice works and how that information can be delivered in a choral setting, which I think most of our minds are wrapped around, that it's easy to convey some of this information in a voice lesson. But sometimes the one size fits all in a choral rehearsal doesn't always work. And so what's the right approach? So feel free to jump in. This is not necessarily a presentation, it's just a conversation, but what do you guys feel like are some of the things that choral directors could fairly easily and fairly quickly do to improve the sound of their choir just by knowing certain things about how the voice works and how they could deliver that to a group of 50?
Well, I wonder, Jamie, if you're okay with this, if I might just talk a little bit about our story. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Just so that, and I think that talking about that story will sort of springboard into the conversation.
Sure.
So like I mentioned, we were colleagues together at East Carolina University, and I conducted the chamber singers there at ECU, which is an excellent chamber choir. And I would notice every year as the students would come through an audition that the very best sounding students came from the studio of Dr. Rhodes. And by the time I was in my fourth year there, it seems like the whole choir was a Dr. Rhodes student. And so she and I got to talking a lot about vocal technique stuff, and I would often go to her like when I had a issue in choir, like a vocal thing that I couldn't really solve, I'd ask her because I knew that she was the teacher of a lot of the students. And then there would be this back and forth sort of discussion about vocal technique between choral conductor and voice teacher. And it was really exciting and kind of the first time where I had really had that kind of relationship with a voice teacher. And then we just became sort of vocal geeks, and that we talked about these things all the time. And then when I eventually went to BYU, I had this idea to start bringing her out for our retreats at the beginning of each year as kind of a way to jumpstart the singing in the choir, and we've been doing it every year since then. I don't know if Jamie, you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, he is indeed accurate. That's kind of how this started, but somewhere in there, I was actually thrown into the choral world. When I first took my job at ECU, I was just voice teacher, and eventually took over the vocal pedagogy program. And then we lost a conductor and kind of had to do some shuffling. And I ended up standing in front of the treble ensemble, courtesy of Andrew Crane. And it was the first time I had been back in front of an ensemble outside of my church choir, which only counts to a certain degree. It was the first time I had been standing in front of an ensemble in an official capacity since, with the exception of like a few run out things, since I had been a high school choral conductor. And when I was a high school choral conductor, that was before, I'll say, my teacher ears really developed when it comes to putting the science of, like, I hadn't personally finished the process when I was teaching public school, high school choir. I hadn't personally finished the process myself of figuring out my own technique and putting my own voice together, which I find is incredibly valuable for teachers. Like, inevitably you understand it because you went through it and put your own instrument together. I hadn't quite finished that for myself. And I hadn't become the full-fledged voice science, vocal pedagogy nerd that all of a sudden I was when I found myself standing in front of this women's choir. And it was immediate, like, ear overload, because I was standing in front of a choir and I wasn't hearing the bass sound and trying to fix the sound from outside in. Like, I wasn't even capable. I heard 60 throats specifically doing 60 very wrong things. And I thought, oh my goodness, how in the world am I going to make them sound like I need to teach every single one of them to do the thing better. And I wasn't able of just helping them with intonation. I needed to help them with what was causing their intonation.
And I think if I could jump in here, I think that I sort of was the other way around. So here I am, having done choral conducting for many years, and where I sort of look at the group and make changes to this conglomerate group sound. And here I was having more and more questions and, tinkering with the production at the individual level. And so we both kind of came at it from the opposite end and kind of have met in the middle now. And have, over the years now sort of in tandem gone to different professional conferences and presented a kind of dog and pony show about this.
Right.
So
Dog and pony is accurate.
And so, yeah, in fact, I wanted to address one thing you said, Jamie, a second ago, where I think sometimes as choral directors, when we have 60 throats doing 60 wrong things in front of us, one of the scary things is that you start to know, especially if you've done it for a while, you start to learn that the thing you say to help 20 of those throats do the right thing might be internalized by 20 others, and it makes it worse.
Exactly.
Because some of their, you never quite know how they're going to interpret what you say. Maybe they're already doing X, Y, and Z correctly, but then they hear the choral conductor's instructions to make it better, and then they overproduce or whatever. So what are some things that you guys have developed as a way to kind of think our way through that?
Well, I'll tell you where I kind of came to it for myself, because that was my realization. I was standing there in front of a whole bunch of kids and I was hearing individual issues. And after kind of like trying all the wrong things, which is what we do before we find the right ones, right? I started taking my own advice, and I found myself in my pedagogy classes where I was teaching budding teachers who would come to me and they would say, "Oh, Dr. Rhodes, I mean, I'm a mezzo. What in the world do I do with a tenor? Like, I don't know how to teach a tenor." Or like, "Dr. Rhodes, there's this like high soprano coming in and I'm a baritone. How do I deal with that?" And I would find myself telling those students, you got to come back to the basics of how an instrument works. Like, yes, you might have a tenor in front of you, but it's a human being with a throat and a set of vocal folds and a tongue, and they are breathing and sending air out, and they're singing vowels, and your job is to get them to sing real vowels through a free tube, and that's your job. Whether it's a tenor or a baritone or a soprano or a mezzo, you're dealing with basically the same anatomy, right? The sound is produced the same way at the very, very base level. Now, once you get out of the basics, it starts to get a little bit more individualized. And so eventually I sort of figured out that I could kind of take my own advice. And I had to sort of boil the craziness that becomes all the things we talk about with vocal technique kind of down to the very basic things. And I think that's where Andy and I have ended up with when it with in regards to the things that are most effective for us in the choral realm, going right back to kind of like the basic thing. When you hear a sound that's out of tune, it's like, okay, what's going on? Okay, I could take every one of those individual singers and give them like specific things, or I can look at them and I can go, oh, well, alignment wise, half of them are here. Let's fix that. Now I've made them, they're going to sound better, and it's probably going to fix part of my intonation. So we start with the basic things. Did they take a breath? Nope. Not a single one of them took a breath. Okay, well, now I've got their tube open. Now we're going to take a breath. And most of the time, just going through the base elements of how an instrument works, you get better, you get closer and closer to the sound. And oftentimes you find out that whatever you heard that was wrong, what is not even remotely the issue, and you end up with a better sound than you would have had you just tried to fix that issue.
Yeah,
I want to jump in here too, and then we'll let you talk since it's your podcast, of course. But when she talks about basic stuff, people are going to listen to this podcast and be like, "Okay, so this is stupid. I'm not going to learn anything in this because I know about basics of singing. I know that how to sing. But in choir we deal with these other sort of peripheral things, and that's what I am concerned about. But what we kind of have discovered is that not everybody actually is on the same page with regards to these basic things. And so that's where we get into some of the myths and, some of the misconceptions, both on the voice teacher side and on the choral conductor side.
Oh,
It's
100%.
Yeah, because there's a lot of times, and this is maybe it's just the way I interpret it. A lot of times, choral conductors get this bad rap because we are making these singers do X, Y, and Z, and so we're a problem and we're the bad guy, and the voice teacher is correct and right. And yeah, that probably happens sometimes, but it also sometimes happens that, frankly, the voice teacher is not right, And so there are things that person needs to figure out that then would serve the choral situation better. And I think that we can get into those kind of specifics as we go.
When it comes to these myths that we're talking about, that's another thing I think we're finding. When there's miscommunication or misunderstanding on both sides, almost always the myths come from a good place. Like, never do you have a choral conductor or a voice teacher who is intentionally doing it wrong. Like, we're all ultimately pursuing the same thing. We're all ultimately pursuing a free, efficient production that gives us a balanced sound that's in tune, and a technique for our singers that's flexible, that allows them to sing in different styles and make different colors. That's what we're all pursuing. And we're usually trying to pursue it the same way. We're trying to make sure our singers take a good breath, make sure our singers open the throat, make sure our singers sing the beautiful, tall, round vowels. And those are all truths of the vocal world, but our understanding of what those things are isn't always totally clear. And that's where we end up kind of butting heads a little bit. We're all trying to do the same things, but we don't totally define what those things really mean.
Right. Okay. So let's attack it this way, if that's okay. Let's flip the script a little bit and say there's singers that have been in either of your choirs for whatever time period you feel like, 3 months, I don't know. And you say to the singers in the choir that have learned these ideas that you're talking about, these basic elements, what would those singers tell you what are the basic elements? Like, if a choir director, one of Dr. Rhodes or Dr. Crane's, telling them to fix X, Y, and Z, what are those basic things?
That's a really good way, I think, to frame the question, actually. And Jamie, maybe I'll just do a couple and you do a couple, right? One of the things that we will say has to do with this idea of alignment that Jamie was talking about. But when you hear alignment, everything you always heard about alignment has to do with the posture, with the shoulders and with the sternum and all this stuff, and the one foot in front of the other, and there's a certain thing that you got to do, and knees slightly bent, all that. When we talk about alignment, we talk about the tall neck, which is the idea that the back of your neck feels slightly taller than the front of your neck. And you can see Jamie demonstrating it right there. That is the most important alignment thing, because that is what allows your larynx to be in a stable position. And it allows your tube that Jamie was talking about, your vocal tract, to be in its most unhindered, uncollapsed way. So that's one thing a student would say is, he always tells us to keep a tall neck. And then I'll say one more and then give it to Jamie. Another thing that I will tell them is to sing real vowels. And what I mean by sing real vowels is say the vowel like in your normal speech. So E, A, A, whatever the vowel is, just say it normally and notice where your tongue is. And you'll notice where it is, which is lying in the front, down against the bottom teeth. And then we talk about changing the shape above that, which Jamie might get into. But what we get into problems is, as choral conductors, we so often sing these kind of fake vowels, which is modifying everything to or something, which actually cuts off resonance that we could have if we had kept our tongue in its natural position. So that's what I mean by when I say just sing real vowels. Sing the vowel the way that you would speak the vowel, and that puts your tongue in the right position. So those are a couple of things.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
When I say things like getting to the basics, I mean like literally like under the roots of the plant basics. Like, I'm not talking about take a good breath and sing beautifully. No, I'm literally talking about teaching these students that one of the very first things I teach them is that they're a wind instrument and they are responsible for what is essentially a tube. Like, they have to think about the fact that they have a vibration that's happening, and that vibration is traveling through a tube. And the sound that comes out of their face is 100% responsible, or is 100% reliant upon what they do with that tube, right? And they're in control of that tube. Tall neck that Andy talked about, that's one of the first ways they can take charge of their tube. We tend to be alignment-wise out here, which makes these muscles in our throat all of a sudden supporting our head. You bring your head over your body, you find length in the back of your neck, loosen that head neck joint at the top. All of a sudden, you've taken your tube, which is crushed. I always use like a brass instrument, and I tell them to think about, okay, well, what would happen if your instrument to your tube was like that? It's gonna make it really hard to play that trumpet if the tube is collapsed. Mm-hmm. Not to mention the fact that's gonna be a pretty busted sounding trumpet, right? It's not going to be a beautiful sound, right? So
let me just jump in here, Jamie, and it'll be like really quick. But so often as choral directors, we know this. We know that you're supposed to have a good alignment, but where we fix it is like here, and when actually that didn't do anything to the tube. That just changed our torso in some way. Anyway,
and the torso can be effective. If they're collapsed, then it is hard for them to get a decent breath with their body. But if they're out here, I mean, especially like think of your poor tenors, like if they're going up close to passaggio, they're 100% going to do that. Like every blasted time, they're going to lift and reach for it. And immediately they're making their job harder, not to mention your tone is getting more and more rigid, and you're probably starting to deal with intonation problems, and you're probably on the podium telling them to sing a prettier vowel, which is not going to give you the space in the throat that actually opens their trumpet. So one of the very first things my kids sing or know, just like Andy said, is tall neck, because immediately that puts them in charge of their tube and they start thinking about it like that. The real vowel thing, again, they will come to me and they will sing, oh, because they're trying to find that warm within their vowel. But in doing that, they're actually moving their tongue back into their tube, and now their tube is closed. And so they learn that ah, eh, and they learn to open the tube, ah, eh, to find the space around it. My kids also get this, I tell them to turn on the car. I always talk about the idea that as a singer, you have to turn the car on before you sing. Like they have to actually take air into their body, and they actually need to hear it. So they learn that if I don't hear them breathe before they make a sound, the car isn't on, and that scares them, and they look at me like I must be crazy, because they've been taught that a noisy breath is a bad breath, and oh my gosh, if we hear our air, that's bad, which comes from a good place. What you don't want to hear is right? Not because of the noise it made, but because that tells us that the air is hitting stuff, which means the throat is closed. That's why you don't want to hear that sound, not because it makes a sound. And so I tell them, okay, that's great, but I need to hear you. If all of you are in tall neck place and you take a nice free breath, and all 45 of you, if there are 45 of you, go, I'm going to hear 45 people go, sing. We're going to hear that. And it's going to be audible. It's not going to be noisy, but it's going to be audible. And so I teach them to make sure that they hear a healthy, energized, free inhale before they sing. Otherwise, they don't put that connection together with the fact that if they don't take a breath, they just immediately start singing with no gas in the car, and their body's not prepared to help them, and the tube is shut down.
Both Jamie and I, in our rehearsals, where choir directors like to stop and fix this vowel and fix this thing, we will stop our choir if we don't hear the inhalation. And that, I know that's like really, blasphemous for many conductors, because it's got to be silent, right? But if you think about it, an energized in-breath will yield an energized tone.
100%.
But the silent breath that we're so accustomed to is slow air. And that's not going to help your air be fast and energized when you begin singing. We talk about a runway, right? And this is the Bernoulli principle, right? So the plane needs plenty of runway in order to take off. And if it's like turning the car on, like Jamie would said. And if they don't get that audible breath, we know that the resultant sound is going to be under-energized. I will have my students often also listen to King singers or Voce Sait or whatever, and I say, listen to them breathe. And you'll hear it. It's like, it's completely obvious.
We don't hear it as a musical thing. Like, it's not a deterrent. Like, you don't hear the King singers and
Right.
gosh, what noisy breathers.
Right.
Because it's not a noisy,
Right.
unmusical breath. It's an energized turning on of the car in a healthy way, right? But they can be taught to notice it, and then they do it. And the other thing that I teach them about the breath, in addition to making sure they hear it and they take responsibility for it, is something I call the prep, which is what they have to do before they sing. And it's part of taking the breath, but it essentially gets their body ready to make the sound. And it's the idea of it combines tall neck with an open body. And I teach them usually to breathe up this way, because if they breathe straight back, then you get that noisy kind of gaspy breath. But if they breathe up, they get this. And what they find is that it hooks into the things that I tell them about what palate lift should feel like versus what they think it feels like. And that preparation, the breath, not only turns on the car, but it also opens the tube. And I teach them to think about the fact that, I mean, the difference between you and the trumpet, aside from many other differences, is that every time that you stop playing your instrument, your trumpet collapses. And if you don't open it before you start playing it again, then the sound you're making is going to be compromised by the fact that not only is it harder to make that sound, but you can't get a good one because it's a closed space.
I'm going to interrupt the nerding out session that's going on right now just briefly to thank the members of the Patreon page for this podcast. There are recurring and frequent costs that come about when you put on a show like this, and I have a growing group of dedicated people over at patreon.com/choralosophy that for as little as $3 a month vote with their recurring payment over there to donate and to chip into some of the costs and help me underwrite the show. Sometimes it's just because they appreciate the value the show brings to them. Sometimes they see that it's hard work and they want to chip in a little bit of something, almost like a tip. But it adds up over time, and it's a really, really helpful thing to ensuring this show can continue forever. And so I really, really appreciate those people. You really just don't even know how much I appreciate the folks over there. There is a producer level that people can opt into over there. And so currently this show is being produced by at Patreon by David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. But over there, for people who decide to join up at the $3 or more level, you're getting special content that only folks on that site can hear and see. There are supplemental materials that I create for some of the episodes on the show, as well as just the behind the scenes info, what guests are coming up next, all kinds of things that are there that Patreon members only can find. So head on over there and check that out. Right. Let's talk about the palate a little bit, because of course that's one of the most common. Choir director says raise the soft palate to the choir and it's supposed to fix everything. I'm usually of the mind that it oftentimes causes more problems that it solves just to say that to kids.
Yes.
Because if you look at a cross section kind of MRI scan or image of a human head, you can see that the soft palate doesn't really move very much. And so if you're telling a singer to move a thing that's almost impossible to move, you might actually be moving their tongue instead.
We do speak the same language here, obviously. Yeah.
Okay.
Jamie, let me say something. You do the hand deal, right?
Okay.
Okay.
They have a code. They have a code.
We have code here. So yeah, you're exactly right. Most of the time when we choral people say raise your soft palate, what a student does, and frankly often what a conductor really is asking for, is for them to pull back the tongue and plug up the tube, as we talk about. And it creates less space, not more. And so you get this kind of sound. And that's the apparent raised soft palate. What that does give you, which is seen as a benefit, is a kind of homogeneous, warm sound in a way. And so if you cheat every vowel in that space and put it back there, you're going to get a certain kind of blend. But what it doesn't give you is intelligibility of any vowels, and also it doesn't give you real resonance, because you're actually lowering the palate and you're cutting off the natural frequencies that you can have.
And that equates to intonation. Like if you're cutting off the frequencies, then you're going to start having intonation problems, especially when those singers get into a place where you've got them way back here and they have this understanding of a raised palate, meaning this stretch that they feel in the back of the throat, this like, and a lot of times it comes from being taught to raise your soft palate by the yawn, and they get really caught up in that sensation of that like super back kind of sensation, and they think that is lifted palate. And it makes sense if you show them, even like on the MRI or whatever, you show them and they're like, oh, okay, so that's back here. Then clearly that weird stretch thing that I feel must be the opening of the palate, and what it actually is, or the lifting of the palate. And what it actually is their tongue pulling back, trying to kill them. And they associate that like backward with that sound. And then we like the kind of homogeneous warmth that comes from it. But the minute they get into passaggio, you put your sopranos on E, F, G at the top of the staff and ask them to sing ah up there on that, or even they're going to start to sag, and then you're going to have them pointing up because they're falling under the pitch or something. Or I mean, tenors, same thing with them, or baritone or altos trying to make the transition down into their lower register, they're going to go out of tune in that if they're singing in that place.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you guys ready for something really nerdy?
Yeah.
And you probably already know this, but do you guys play with Voce Vista at all?
Sometimes.
Yeah, I talk about it a lot on the show. They're one of our folks. So this is something that I think choral directors, as somebody who nerds out with Voce Vista in front of my choir a lot, I think as choral directors, we like that tongue pulled back muted sound because it's easier to blend. And the reason it's easier to blend is when the tongue pulls back, you're essentially taking off a few layers of overtones.
Yep.
At which point the resonance goes away, and that makes it easier. And of course, these are things we don't know that we're doing as we're doing it, but we're essentially doing the math of how many overtones do I have to get all my singers to accurately line up. And if I mute the sound, then we only have to line up the first 4 or 5 of them in order for it to sound like it's in tune. But if it's a pure and fully resonant vowel with a formant, then we've got to line up the entire series, or else it doesn't sound in tune. And so over generations, in my opinion, we've just started teaching each other the way to put a Band-Aid on that problem by turning everything into just the fundamental and the first few partials.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if that's almost then become, by those generations teaching each other to do that's become the American choral sound.
Well, and this is one of the problems that when we choral conductors get ourselves in trouble with the voice teachers, and this is our fault, right? Because, and I learned this lesson way back really early in my career when I auditioned a singer who came back for his second year. So I had him in choir for a whole year. He was like a band kid that just did choir anyway. Then he auditioned for the second year, and he comes in and he sings his little "My Country 'Tis of Thee" or something, and it's just like really swallowed. And I was like, man, why are you singing like that? And he said to me, he said, isn't that what you've wanted all this time? And I had to do a real like search of my soul. I was like, I can see why he sort of where he got that message. And so they go into their voice lesson and they sound like that. And of course the voice teacher might be upset about that. And so, yeah, but then I know a choral conductor might hear what I'm saying and be like, okay, well, what are you trying to say? Sing more forward? Is that what you're trying to say? Because if I do that, then I'm not going to get blend. I'm going to get stridency. And that's not the opposite of this, right? These are two wrongs.
Right. Well, speaking of the other wrong, he's talking about, maybe the kid picks up this kind of muted sound from choir, and then the voice teacher's like, no. But let's say that same kid is in his voice lesson and he's trying to figure out resonance, and he's misunderstood the concept of resonance, whether the teacher's missing the ball or not, but he's misunderstanding it. And so he's working for ping. in like presence in his sound instead of real resonance that comes from freedom and overtones, right? Which he could use in a choral situation. But if he goes into that choir with pressure because he's trying to sing in his resonance or her resonance, they're going to get the choral conductor hand. Like they're going to get the pipe down because it's going to be a wretched sound. And there's no way in the world you can blend with that sound. And then, little Jimmy's going back to his voice teacher saying, Dr. Crane won't let me sing in my resonance. And it's like, well, no, you're not in your resonance, little Jimmy. That's not what that is.
But let me jump in here and say, sometimes though, that voice teacher, because what the student is doing is loud,
right?
Okay, it's loud and it's sort of piercing. That's good. That's right. And this is where the voice teacher needs to remember that, no, they're pressing, no, they're pulling their tongue back. There's all kinds of tension. Their literally body is shaking and there's a bleat in their vibrato. Right. Okay, yeah, but it's loud, so it must be right. But no, there's a problem with that too.
We're all teaching singers, whether I'm doing it in front of my choir or I'm doing it in the studio, I'm teaching singers to sing. And regardless of the product that I'm trying to get at the end of the day, whether it's their Brahms song or whether it's a motet that I'm working on with them in an ensemble setting, I should be giving them techniques in those two settings that teach them to use their instrument in a flexible way to be successful in both of those things, not in a way that only serves them here if they're trying to sing this, or then in this area, we should all, regardless of how we're standing in front of them, be giving them vocal information that relates to a flexible technique, not vocal information that produces a certain sound.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, essentially, we're teaching them to uncover the natural sound that their body would make if it was unimpeded.
Right.
We're carving away at the stone to reveal the statue.
And I will say this, as somebody who comes in with the stigma of being a voice teacher, initially there's the question mark from the choral conductor that says, okay, is what you're telling me going to make me have to sacrifice my choral aesthetic at the end of the day? That's not something I want to do. And most of the time, the concern from the other side is that I'm going to say, okay, you have to teach them to sing healthfully, which means, you're going to need vibrato in that Monteverdi. Like, I mean, you know what I mean? And it's kind of like, no. That's actually not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying they should be able to sing Puccini and in a small ensemble, period. And with multiple different kinds of sounds. Like, you shouldn't have to change your ultimate aesthetic. Matter of fact, your aesthetic might get better. You might be able to take that super cohesive, super lined up, super in tune, clear sound to a whole new level if you open their tube.
Yeah, and because back to what Chris was saying about this stripping all the formants away and sort of taking things away and see what you've got left. When I used to conduct choirs in that way, yes, it's sort of homogenous, but then once any bit of individual color comes in, it's like destroyed everything, right? And so you're constantly putting out fires. You're putting out that tenor fire, putting out that soprano fire, giving the hand here, giving the hand here. And actually, if you just get everybody singing well with these principles that we're talking, the resultant quote unquote blend is far superior. And actually, the intonation is far superior because you're not, again, putting out fires of intonation. Oh, you got to sharp the leading tone here. Watch your descending intervals here. Oh, this is, you got to, this major third is not big enough or whatever it is. It's just in tune now because they're capitalizing on the natural resonances that want to be in tune.
I completely agree. And it's short-sighted, but I like how Jamie said it earlier. It's from a good place. It's short-sighted in that we take away all the things that are special about our singers' voices to achieve blend, with air quotes. And it's like I was saying before, it helps us tune faster. Like, we can get to something that sounds like it's in tune faster by putting band-aids on things. But the long-term effect is that you are not then teaching your singers what level of concentration they have to have with their ear in order to line up 6 partials instead of 4. You know, and so the intonation of the choir over an entire season or an entire school year will be actually less good if they're not singing with their full resonance. And kids, even young kids, can be taught to do this.
Oh my
Like, you
goodness.
know, they absolutely can. So it's an interesting thing. We talked about that kind of the myth of the palate related to the tongue. What about myths that you can think of related to, I'm thinking of other ways that we kill those upper partials with the lips. Are there weird things that we do with the lips in choir world?
Yeah, so I'm gonna, well, we'll go back and forth, but this was one of the biggest things that Jamie had to get out of my tool belt, because I came from a tradition where the lips were a big part of it, right? So if the vowel, if the sound that you're making, i.e. the vowel, is too strident or bright or something, the way that you mute that is by fluting the lips, you know. And you hear all the different things about fish lips or kiss or go like this, and, you know, push your lips out. And just like the pulling the tongue back thing, it does mute something and gives you a kind of a blend. But what it also does is at least 2 things. One, it tightens your singer's embouchure here, so they're all kinds of tense. But then, if you think about it, as you pull those lips forward, you're actually pulling muscles out and lowering palate on the inside, which again is cutting off resonance. And so I used to do all that stuff and color your vowel, you know, more lips, more. Now I never do it. And I just, if I see it, I can point it out and say, no, you're doing this. Make the space internally. In fact, I find myself telling my students nowadays to not open their mouth so much, to actually close their mouth a little bit more and make sure that you have that dome on the inside, and to not give so much of this sort of weird embouchure, because then the vowel is unintelligible. Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, I would say that's another kind of way that we sabotage ourselves a little bit. The idea of the draw drop, like we hear a sound and we diagnose it accurately. We go, okay, it's too shallow. There needs to be more depth there, and immediately we go, okay, drop your jaw. We don't change anything else. We don't even listen to see if the vowel was an actual vowel that exists in nature. We just go, okay, well, that sound is shallow. We need more space in it. Drop your jaw. And the problem with that is that they can totally drop their jaw in the front and still be completely collapsed in the back. Like absolutely completely collapsed. And the only thing they did by dropping the jaw in the front is essentially taking the bell of the trumpet and going, so you just got a more diffuse sound, which again just gives you more muting in some capacity, right? And what I've found more success with is teaching them. I teach them about jaw release instead of jaw drop. And that's one of the first things they learn. They learn tall neck. They learn turn on the car. They learn hear the sound when it comes in, or hear the breath when it comes in. And they learn pretend like you've got little teeny tiny squishy marshmallows between your back teeth, or pretend like you've been to the dentist and had a little bit of dental work and you're just ever so slightly released back there.
But that is so much different than, I remember as somebody telling me once, you got to have 3 fingertips width between your front teeth, and that's the right ah vowel.
Look, if you do that, pull your jaw down all the way as far as it'll go, and you will feel your larynx pull up. Like the muscles that are attached here will actually shorten your tube on the inside if you super overextend. And that's never our job. Our job is always to open the tube and keep the air going through it. And so I find myself essentially teaching the same thing. Release right there. As long as I've taught them release, I've got their jaw open or got their throat open. I've taught them to actually breathe and feel palate lift where the sensation actually is, which is more frontal than where palate might be, right? Once I've taught them those things, then I can say, oh, the vowel's too shallow. Bring your jaw to a more neutral position. Find your marshmallows. Put the vowel inside. Lift up. Ah, there, rather than ah. Immediately you lose. I mean, you can hear it probably on this recording. You lose overtone just in my speaking voice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so basically what's going on, again, in the nerdies realm of overtones, is that when we make a strident, ugly sound, we are essentially creating dissonance between some of our own overtones. We're dissonant with ourselves. And sometimes the easiest way to fix that is to pull the tongue back or wrap the lips around it, because you're muting those overtones that are dissonant with each other. Instead of, as what you guys are describing, instead of diagnosing the problem itself, which is why the vowel on the inside had not been formed correctly. So that's why I like the term Band-Aid vowels. Choir directors like Band-Aid vowels because it doesn't allow us, or we don't then have to spend the rehearsal time talking about the technique that would fix the problem on the inside of the head.
Well, here's another. I know that you're big. I've seen your posts that are big on sight singing and solfege and not using the piano and everything. And I know that your reasoning for that is, give a man a fish or whatever. It's giving them a tool that they can use forever and ever. And this is the same thing. I remember when Jamie and I first started doing this and working together, I was very afraid.
Can I tell a story? Please let me.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so this is literally the first time Andy Crane brought one Jami Rhodes out to Provo, Utah. I'd never been to Utah before. And of course, they thought I was like a cartoon character because I sound just like this, right? And they're like, what is that thing? And so I come into their rehearsal and I tell them to do these things, and they'll do anything because they're wonderful, wonderful kids, right? And so I come in there and I tell them to do these things, and they're looking at me like I have 16 heads. And essentially what I did was I put them in tall neck position. I got them to let go of whatever they're doing here and release that. And I did what I called at the time the magic hand, which I had them all put their hand right there. And Andy gave them a chord to sing. And I had them breathe above the hand and sing above the hand, which is just a little trick that gets them to actually get the inside of the space open and feel the palate lift more frontal instead of trying to feel it back there. And the sound that came out of these kids, for those of you who know Andy Crane at all, he has this like amazing cackle that happens when he's like startled or really like excited about something. And they all had their hands right there, and they took a breath and sang a chord on a vowel. And the sound that came out of these kids was like, it was ringing and in tune and completely cohesive. And he like lost his mind. And of course it happened in like the last 20 seconds of rehearsal, because doesn't every breakthrough always happen in the last 20 seconds of rehearsal, and you have to like send them away? And then we left and he got back to his office, and we were just sitting there, and he was just in his head thinking, trying to like process these things. And he goes, I just don't even know if I can do that. Like, I don't know if this will work. Like, I just don't know if this will work. And it was in his brain realizing how much of a safety net he would have to let go of,
right,
even remotely try this. And when you first start looking at it, I'll let him take over because I think he knows where I'm going with this. When you first start thinking about it like this, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I already do so much in my rehearsals. How in the world am I going to have time to also teach them to sing? Like, I'm trying to teach them to read music. I'm trying to get a good sound. Where am I going to teach them to sing in while I'm doing all these things? And I think that's kind of the overload place that he found himself, but that's not where you are now, right?
No, in fact, so all this worry, because I used to just put on Band-Aid after Band-Aid after Band-Aid, which took a lot of work and a lot of time. Just like when you feed the choir everything from the piano, it takes some time. But in teaching them how to sing and teaching them these principles, it actually saves so much time in the end. Because if you hear a flaw, whatever that flaw is, you address the technique, you address the vocal principle. And now it not only fixed that little thing you heard, but it just fixed many other things at the same time. And I find that I work a lot less hard. I find that they sing better more often. And there's kind of they get a progress that you can kind of monitor. And by the end of the year, I hardly ever even talk about anything because they're like singing like professional choir now. You just sing the tunes, and you might have to address something here or there. But if I had always done what I did in the past, I'd still be putting out fires all the way to the end of the year.
Right. We're teaching them. You teach them a song, in which case they will know the skills for that song, or you teach them to sing.
Right.
And then they start to be able to copy paste that skill
transfer
onto other songs. And that's actually kind of, Andy, my point of why I talk so much about sight reading and rehearsing a cappella. It saves me time too, even at the high school level.
Right.
I have time to talk to my high school kids about stuff like we're talking about right now because they can sing the correct notes the first time.
Yeah.
And then we
Yeah.
can, and then we can go on. So all these things, when you take the time to do it the right way, it does save time in the long run, but it's a front-loaded investment of time.
Yeah, and it's hard to believe, it's hard to trust it. And actually, even as you were just talking, and I can sort of sympathetically hear choral conductors being like, that's not possible because you've got 60 different throats there. You can't actually teach a choir to sing in the same way that you teach a private voice lesson to sing because everybody's different. In fact, Jamie, haven't you kind of heard that
Oh yeah,
before?
but I've also proven it to be not really true in my, I mean, let's say, I mean, it seems like it might be a front-loaded process, but the reality of it is teaching them a skill set, especially if you're really clear with it and it's right in the basics of there's a tube and you're trying to keep it open and that will improve the sound. I mean, even when I go and do these all county clinics where I'm there for a day or 2 days with these kids I've never met before, right? I'm going to get a better product at the end of the day. I get a better product in the first hour now, assuming they know the notes and the rhythms, but I'm going to get a better product in the first hour just because I'm holding them accountable just for that. If I only do that with a group of high school kids, I get a warmer, more in tune, more beautiful group of more energized singing. And then let's say they manage to master that and they also manage turn on the car. Do you have any idea how big of a difference open the throat and actually breathe will make for high school students, which seems so mundane, but just those couple of principles in a short-term situation with kids you've never seen before, immediately you get a better product. Immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how many times have we heard a colleague say, oh, that singer just, for a singer that sings out of tune, oh, they just have a horrible ear.
Right. They can't hear.
And I think, well, but they're bent in half. They're singing with their tongue in their throat. Their mouth is only open a centimeter.
Yeah.
How do you know they don't have a good ear? They're dissonant with themselves. Of course, they can't sing it in tune.
Don't even know what their voice is.
Right. Yeah. So that's almost always, that's become the more years I've done this, my default is try to fix the technique first.
Right.
And if that doesn't solve the vocal problem or the intonation problem on its own,
right,
then maybe but 99 times out of 100 it solves the problem.
Right.
At the end of the day, when they're in your ensemble, they should by the end of the semester, they should be better singers.
Yeah.
Jamie?
Yeah,
we make them better musicians, but they should be better singers, not just better choral singers. They should be better singers at the end of the year.
Yeah.
One thing that Jamie and I have found, which has been so gratifying, is when we come back the next year, and I'm talking specifically about non-major types, people who just have a pretty good instrument but don't want to sing in choir. When they come back the second year and they sing for you, and you're like, "What the heck? You're sounding amazing. Did you take voice over the summer?" They're like, "No, I just was in choir." And the best feedback I think I've ever gotten was somebody saying, "I'm a better singer because of being in choir, not in spite of being in choir." And that there's nothing more gratifying to me than hearing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what would you say to the person? This maybe could be the kind of the way we wrap this up to kind of leave people who listen to this episode spinning and thinking about how it applies in their own world. What would you say to the person who might be listening to this conversation and say, well, man, all three of those people seem to talk a lot just now about what's right and what's wrong. Who are they to say what's right and what's wrong as it relates to singing and making certain noises? Are we prioritizing a style or a way of singing, or how would you guys think of that?
Go, Jamie.
I would say I'm prioritizing air going through a tube. Always. Literally, air going through a tube. I mean, essentially, at the end of the day, every vocal sound, regardless of how amazing it is, like your very favorite singer or very favorite recording that just blew you away. I mean, as bubble bursting as it is, All that is air vibrating through a tube, right? And the goal for every singer in regard to having a flexible instrument that they can have control over, that they can find different colors with, that they aren't stuck in some capacity that limits range or limits dynamics or limits colors or styles or whatever it is, that's all dependent on whether or not the air is flowing through their instrument or flowing through their tube without constriction. Mm-hmm. And everything we do as singers, whether we're breathing or phonating or articulating, every single thing we do has to do with how that tube is being affected. And if we're doing something that's constricting that tube, even if our intention is good, we're getting in the way of that air.
Right. So yeah. So let's see if I can put a point on this and see. Feel free to say that this is not what you're saying, but it sounds like what you're saying is that whether you're a bel canto singer who's say learning to unify their registers through their passaggio and sing with certain kind of registration choices, or if you're a gospel or musical theater singer who maybe is a female singer who's taking their chest voice up higher than you would in a different style, all of these things still apply in how how the tube has to be aligned and how the constriction can be eliminated from the body and to improve health.
Yes, goal is always to keep the air going through the tube. And what style you're singing, whether you're in a choral ensemble, whether I'm singing musical theater stuff, which I tend to do because I'm a nerd, or whether I'm singing Rossini or whether I'm singing Strauss, even though I shouldn't. All of those things I'm making with the same vibration. My goal is always to keep the air going through the tube. Now, I might use my registration differently. I might mix differently. I might use a heavier registration higher than I would if I were singing Mozart, right? I might shape the tube differently because my goal is to get a different color. I might widen the tube as opposed to lengthening the tube, but my goal will never be to constrict the tube. Mm-hmm. Immediately, I'm adding extra force. I'm adding extra muscular work. And anytime I'm doing that, I'm taking away my ability to be a flexible artist. And I don't have control.
Love it. One thing that I would just sort of throw in here too, I have two things. You'll notice that in this conversation, we have not used the V word very much, which is the word for vibrato, right? Because I think a lot of choral conductors and maybe voice teachers too, they think, oh, here's another talk about vocal health and about, choral versus solo. And it all boils down to who uses vibrato and who doesn't. And I think that is just the grossest sort of misunderstanding and boiling it down to something that's really not germane to the conversation. Like vibrato, less vibrato, more vibrato, narrower, wider, that's another topic altogether. We're talking about singing. I mean, if you listen to your favorite solo artist, if you listen to your favorite singer, they're varying the rate of their vibrato all the time. It's just a thing. It's a coloristic thing. And so styles may change, is what we're saying, but the instrument itself is still the instrument. In fact, I was reading something the other day. It's my second point here about Westerners having a kind of bias towards the British cathedral sound and how that's a problem socially and things like that, and sort of as prioritizing that sound above other cultural sounds and things like that. And I got to thinking, I was just like, I don't even understand what that means, because we're talking about singing, like the mechanism of the human voice. Now, there probably are those people that kind of go for a color, an aesthetic, without regards to the technique under that aesthetic. And so I think one of my goals as a conductor is always, whenever I hear something that needs fixing or whatever, address it through technique and not through description of the sound. Yeah. That sound needs to be more blah, blah, blah. Or this needs to sound like more blah, blah, blah. No, your tongue, your breath, that's what we're after. And then it doesn't matter what style you're singing. You can sing all kinds of styles as long as the technique is right.
Yeah, in fact, I think of it this way. I love the British choral sound, but not because it sounds British.
Right.
I love it because they're good at the techniques that I think that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, right.
There's often, especially now we're talking, of course, it's tricky to talk about a nationality related to a sound because part of it, you could even go to that country and find wide disparities in terms of how technically good a singer is versus amateurs and versus someone else. So I think sometimes people, to answer your question or how you were framing that, Andy, is I think some people hear a choral singer singing with a British accent
Yeah.
Equals a technique that we're talking about right now.
Right.
And they aren't the same.
Right.
So what it's kind of, which kind of goes back to my point earlier about the musical theater versus a bel canto singer. I might be, like you said, Jamie, changing the shape of the tube, usually from the articulators, around the articulators, the shape of the front of the tube. I could change to make a musical theater vowel versus a more bel canto vowel or a pure vowel, whatever, how you'd like to call it. But it doesn't, like you guys have been saying, it doesn't change the shape of the instrument at its core. And it doesn't matter how I choose to shape it, as long as I understand how it works. And so what oftentimes comes across in my classroom is that there is a correct answer, but there isn't a correct style.
Yeah.
Are we kind of on the same page now?
I think so.
I think we were. I think we already were.
I think we always have been. And that's really cool. But I find that in our line of work, and I think Jamie can talk about her line of work too. Like, I think we don't think about singing nearly enough. I think we think so much about repertoire or standing position or conveying a certain message. All of these things are important. But at the end of the day, like, we're teaching singing. I mean, we're choral, and I feel like we need to do more of that in our profession.
Mm-hmm.
We need to learn about singing. Does it mean you have to sound like Pavarotti, you yourself personally? Absolutely not. These are very basic principles. The singers that Jamie here works with are not music majors. They're just the unwashed, that want to just sing for fun. And she makes them sound like, amazing voice majors, just because of science, So I think that's just something that I think that needs to be focused on more from our conductors, is about how to sing. Let's talk less about how to wave our arms and more about how to teach our students how to sing.
Yeah, absolutely, man. If conductor training was more about teaching people how to sing and teaching people how to listen to music.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And less about waving our arms, I think we'd be in much better shape.
Yep.
I think back with horror to my conducting to a recording undergrad. The music was going to be just as good no matter what I did.
That's right.
But yeah, that's good. So all right. So any final thoughts? Things that we didn't get to today that either of you guys think that a choral director just has to know, has to try, or even should be able to incorporate in their next rehearsal tomorrow?
Let's see. Did we cover most of our stuff, Jamie?
It's about, the basic things that I start with at the beginning of the year that I just hammer over and over and over, and that become the transfer things between pieces, and they hear them all year long. And they're also the very things that they can see and kind of put together in their voice lessons, let's say, or in their, I have the pleasure, the handful of them that are voice majors. I also sit in on their jury at the end of the year because I'm on the voice faculty, and I'm writing on their jury sheet, you need more tall neck. Remember how we talked about not dropping your jaw so much in choir? Stop that. Put your space on the inside. And I'm giving them feedback on, their foray piece with stuff that I tell them in choir. Mm-hmm. The basic ones are the tall neck thing, the turn the car on, the prep, meaning what they do before they sing, always opening them and getting them ready to sing before they actually take a breath.
We also, sorry, Jamie, but one other part of that is to see them move in their body too. Because you can sort of breathe and be tight here when you take the breath in. So we have them sort of slightly bend their knees like you're about to run a race or something. And to see it, and they breathe, and we sort of see that little plie that shows us that they're interacting with their whole body. Now, while I'm on that same page, we show them where their lungs are.
Yeah.
Which is not where we think we're supposed to breathe. Okay, so the lungs are here, right? They're high. And we spend all this time talking about breathe, to your feet and stuff. And it's just not real. It's not where air goes into your body. So I'm okay if there's some lift as they take that breath.
We do a lot of building on good things that they already know. Like they all know they want a nice tall vowel. They know they should take a really good breath for singing. They know that it should be low and that something should expand. And so we take all those things that they know as truths, and then we clarify them, give them a little bit more of the science, say, okay, yes, you should expand, but not down here where your ribs actually are, which is up here. And then you basically take the information that they know and just clarify it and build on them. Because it's like we were saying kind of at the beginning of our talk, none of us are intentionally saying bad things. A lot of us are saying really good things, but we're not following through with them in a clear way so that the way they're then received by our students is actually helpful the way we mean for it to be.
That's great. Well, thank you guys so much. This has,
I
think, been enlightening, and I appreciate it. So anyway, again, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. And we'll be in touch soon. All right?
Sure. Thanks for having us. This is great.
Absolutely. Bye.
Thank you so much, as always, for sticking around to the end of an episode. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you got something out of it. I know I did. Of course, I know I let the cat out of the bag a little bit in that episode, that I kind of already knew that I was going to see things eye to eye with these folks. There was a perspective here of how simple and how non-mystical the art of singing really is from a physics and from a physiology standpoint. And I think I agree with Dr. Crane that he said towards the end there, we need to be learning more about what this is. This is our function as music and vocal music teachers, is they should come out of our rehearsals. I could not have agreed more. It was a preach moment for me. They should leave our school year better singers. If they don't, there is an issue there, a deep systemic issue there that we need to be looking at. So hopefully you got something out of that. Quick shout out here towards the end. Don't forget, it is sheet music time for a lot of us. RyanMain.com, GraphitePublishing.com are two websites that are affiliates of the show and have an excellent selection of back to school literature for your choirs. So head over to both of those websites. Again, RyanMain.com and GraphitePublishing.com. You can find a ton of just unbelievable and right at your fingertips, excellent resources there to put in front of your choirs in both a virtual, a hybrid, or an in-person format, and you can get it immediately and have it uploaded to their digital environments and all those fantastic tools that are available for you there. Plus, you can enter Choralosophy at checkout to get 10% off. Finally, you heard us talk a little bit about Voce Vista in that episode. Head over to Voce Vista video, which actually you can find it at vocevista.com/choralosophy. You download it there for free, and it's a resonance software. It shows the singers, whether they're in the room or they sent you a recording, you can plug it in and see the sound waves that they are creating and see the overtones that they're creating. You can see the vowels that they are creating. And in a masked world, that's a pretty cool tool. So you want to check that out as well. Plus, you can do it for free. You can download it for free for 30 days. And if you love it, you can then use that Choralosophy checkout code and get 10% off. So, of course, on the way out, just always going to continue to remind you the big things that help us over here at the podcast. Use the promo code, like I mentioned at the beginning, whenever you make purchases at these awesome vendors. That helps a lot. Of course, heading over to the Facebook page, Choralosophers Facebook page, is a great way to continue the conversation here. That's a very helpful thing. Plus, join the Patreon, patreon.com/choralosophy. And as always, like, share, subscribe, interact with the content. These are the ways that we really drive the conversation out onto social media and make the Choralosophy podcast part of your conversation. I appreciate, as always, you listening. Tune in next time.